This is Newsfeed, the AM edition. I'm Ayandangati. Thanks for starting the day with us. And as we do at the beginning of each day, we obviously help you make sense of some of the big stories to look forward to for the day ahead, as well as for the rest of the week ahead. And today is absolutely no different. Plenty happening in the news cycle that needs you and I to take a moment or two to sometimes let it all sink in and understand what that all means. Which is why, for this part of the show, we have Zain Semaar, who's our news editor here on Newzroom Africa, to help us do exactly that. Zain, once again, thanks very much for coming through. Like I said, we've got plenty to sink our teeth into, so to speak. We'll get to that in just a moment, but what's on Newzroom Africa's diary this morning?
Thank you, Ayanda. So, Pelani Pachadi, our reporter, is out in Deep Kloof, Soweto this morning. He'll be looking at a number of schools that have been abandoned, buildings that have been abandoned, that are now being used as temporary shelters by communities and people who have basically occupied these abandoned buildings and are now making like living quarters out of it. There's also been complaints from that community in Deep Kloof about the schools being used as hangout for criminal elements.
Yeah.
That a lot of crime gets committed from that point, or that they gather there. So we'll be looking at that story. We'll be speaking to communities and also the people who have made the schools their homes. But more importantly, we'll also be speaking to the Gauteng Education Department about what their plans are with some of these disused buildings. Also on our diary this morning, the State Capture Commission, which revealed quite alarming and quite hair-raising testimony yesterday with the mystery witness, Mr. X, starting off by basically wanting protection and basically starting off by saying that he fears for his life, that of his children, and that his testimony will not favor, and it did not favor, former Mhlatuzi Water Board Chairperson Dudi Moyeni. In fact, he's another witness that places Dudi Moyeni, former President Jacob Zuma, and I think something that emerges throughout some of testimonies, the sons of politicians into the mix. So we've heard about Sepiso Magashule and the role he's apparently played. We've heard much about the role of Dudizani Zuma in state capture, and now also Dudu Moyeni's son, and the kind of like intermediary roles that the children of politicians have played, which in itself, if these guys aren't part of any formal structures or political parties, is in itself quite troubling.
Certainly, and who can forget Andile Ramaphosa, right? Whose name also popped up during that whole CR17 Bosasa donation saga. So you're absolutely spot on about that.
Yeah. So just one or two other stuff that I think is worthwhile mentioning on Newzroom Africa's diary is Malungelo Boy will today cover a march from an organization called Men and Women Against Child Abuse. They're basically trying to highlight the fact that the case of a creche teacher, Nelly Senwametse, who has not been formally charged, but a video of her allegedly assaulting creche children, 3 children, went viral. And so they're basically saying, all this evidence is here, why haven't this woman had a day in court? So we'll bring you a little bit about that story. Also in Madibeng, Zintle Kanyane will bring us a story of the municipality of Motlotung, where residents are basically moving out of their houses, Ayanda, to avoid sewage coming directly into their houses as a result of the water crisis that has been in that particular community for over 4 to 5 years already.
Yeah, no, really, really quite tough things that we have to deal with in South Africa. And I'm glad Newzroom Africa is on top of all of it on different parts of the country, as of course we bring it to you from our studio. So this morning, right, there's certainly a common thread going through most of the papers, which we'll get into just now. But there's also a bit of diversity in the front covers pages. I'll kick us off with the Business Day, reporting, I think, expectedly on Moody's announcement that they're going to reduce South Africa's economic growth outlook. It's essentially a prediction of how much they're expecting us to grow over the next year. The forecast was at 1%. It's now been dropped down to 0.7%. We remember the World Bank also taking a very similar trajectory. There seems to be consensus amongst these institutions that things aren't looking rosy. But we didn't need them to tell us that. You know, we can sort of list the many issues that they are also citing that obviously hamper economic growth.
It's a very interesting move, though, just ahead of Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's budget speech. So it's a very interesting move by the
Yeah, and it's certainly going to add pressure on the Finance Minister, as if he needed any himself, as many of us, of course, look at ways through which he's going to curb some of these adverse effects. So yeah, as expected, they're citing things along the lines of the public sector wage bill, and interestingly enough, they also speaking to how the opposition to this is obviously not helping. This comes in the form of politics and of course from unions who are pushing against retrenchments. And if we're going to reduce the public sector wage bill, we're obviously going to have to lay off a few people. That is certainly adding a lot of pressure to the fiscus. And of course the other stuff that has sadly become our daily bread here, you know, power cuts, corruption, etc., taking the fore. Interestingly also, private sector demand, that's essentially you and me. Now, Economics 101 will teach you that for an economy to at least have some kind of life, people need to spend money.
Yes.
The obvious problem with that is that South Africans can't spend money they don't have. Yes. And so stuff like that is also being impacted, which is why we're not having the kind of household spending we want to see, as well as the kind of investment from ordinary South Africans that we want to see. Again, like I said at the beginning of the show, it is expected. I don't know if that softens the blow, though, because the real effects are going to start trickling in if many people haven't already started feeling it.
Yes.
You're looking at the Star this one?
I'm looking at the Star, yes. 3 stories that dominate the front page. One is a picture of the Springboks, congratulating them for winning the Sports Team of the Year award against very esteemed company like Liverpool Soccer Club, etc., etc. A story that's catching my interest here is swindling blacks out of homes. So it's what this newspaper describes as a David versus Goliath case, where the bank is accused of racism when dealing with black mortgage bondholders. So Tina Bambeni is suing Nedbank for $2 million for loss of earnings after she was forced to sell her Kempton Park home. But what for me it does, this story, it throws into the spotlight again practices by corporations in South Africa that still uses race as a differentiator and still uses race-based policies. You remember yesterday we were discussing Discovery Medical Aid Scheme, and here is a big bank being accused, not just being accused, but quite being taken on by a customer. And the same thing happened with medical scheme. So it kind of focuses the spotlight on business practices in South Africa and the racist policies that they are accused of. The last story on the front page is something that I think most newspapers are leading with, and that has grown legs, right? It's this, the Clerk statement and the apology and... So basically this paper is talking about Mandela, Kathrada foundations adding their voice to a whole range of political leaders. I don't think there is a single organization in this country that has not come out condemning de Klerk and his statements. What for me is interesting around all of this is how some political parties have obviously moved and maneuvered their way in the political space around the issue, and then also the very serious questions it throws up about our negotiated settlement, how we got here, and whether what a former Deputy President F.W. de Klerk has mentioned is actually a reflection of what broader white South African communities are thinking at the moment. And a lot of people saying that actually it is consistent with de Klerk's earlier views that when he unbanned the ANC and released Mandela, that he was done so on the back foot and not because he was magnanimous and graceful and thought that black people needed political freedom, but rather because the apartheid government of the time was forced into a situation to begin to negotiate with the ANC. And
those are all the issues I'm really looking forward to flesh out on the show today as we take that story forward, right? What it means about our ability to grapple with our history and, of course, whether or not we're doing that accurately insofar as the facts are concerned, right? Because I think that's also been thrust into the spotlight, so stay tuned for all those conversations. The Sowetan this morning, in true to form, is breaking ranks and leading with quite a bizarre story. And I guess it kind of makes sense to sort of thrash this onto the front page. They're very simply asking, have you seen her? And this is in reference to a woman by the name of Ritabile Mlangeni, who used to work at the Mall of Afrika. it's being alleged that this woman is wanted for stealing about 4 million rand, and you'll never guess how she apparently stole this money. She literally apparently just took it from SBV Secure Solutions, which is a cash depot at the mall, put it in black plastic bags, and simply walked out.
And no one noticed.
And nobody noticed. And the only time that, questions started being raised was when obviously people couldn't find the 4 million rand, went and checked the CCTV cameras and found out that this is what she did. So a source that spoke to the newspaper said that she's a security guard at the mall and obviously knows some of the security measures that are being put in place there and was able to do this in such a brazen manner. What is interesting, though, is that this happened all the way back in July last year. They still have absolutely no idea where she is. But not only that, apparently this is quite common. So there's also a few stats that they've also tabled in this article showing that about, in just the past year, 35 of these type of cases have been reported throughout the country. It is ridiculous. People are literally taking money and putting them in bags and simply walking out, and fascinatingly, completely disappear into thin air.
Does the article in any way speak about how many of these 35 people were prosecuted or followed up on?
Well, I mean, these are the 35 people that we're still looking for.
Okay.
So yeah, go figure. So it's very interesting. Part of the investigation, which I found quite funny, obviously this is a very serious issue though, is, included going to her family's home to try to see if their lifestyle has changed. Needless to say, apparently not much has changed outside of a second-hand car that's been bought, we're told, and even this car is always in the yard. So obviously they're suspecting that part of the family might know where she is. They tried to reach out to the sister who refused to comment, but they're also suspecting that she worked with someone in the acquisition of this money. Because for you to be able to be so brazen and to get away with it, there's a feeling that some of your colleagues might be in on it. Needless to say, the police are calling for assistance in locating Batho William Langeni this morning as they continue with that case. Absolutely, I think for me, mind-blowing that, there's so many issues in this country. Raising questions, obviously, about who also guards the guardians. I mean, she was meant to be the person protecting this money, but obviously took it for herself. Let's look at the Citizen.
The Citizen is also leading with a picture of F.W. de Klerk looking quite pensive, asking the question, Evie, do you call that an apology? And on page 3, they're basically going on and they've got a series of Twitter reacts, which they've posted. If I can just read one from one or two people. Vusi Pikoli talked about, I do not believe that de Klerk and his foundation did not know that apartheid was declared a crime against humanity by the UN, including that the crime of apartheid is prosecutable in terms of the Rome Statute. It's basically saying, actually, the government of the day took the decision not to prosecute certain apartheid leaders, which is, I think, becoming part of the general kind of contestation of ideas of whether that was the correct decision or not. Daniel Silk tweeting, what seemingly started out as political grandstanding by the EFF on the issue of F.W. de Klerk has turned into a political victory for that party following the ill-considered and injudicious defense of apartheid. So going quite big on the F.W. apology, or so-called apology. And then a story also that I think we're going to at Newzroom Africa pay a lot more attention to is the whole SASSA post office debacle. And it seems as if again this thing is going to, this whole situation and the whole handing over to the post office needs to be interrogated and investigated, because from what it appears initially, it seems that there are more problems at the post office with regards to actually handing out these, the grants to beneficiaries.
Absolutely, a whole lot happening. We'll make sure, of course, that we bring it to you right here on Newzroom Africa. Thank you once again. Zain Semaar is our news editor here on Newzroom Africa. Still